The gavel struck the wood with an unforgiving echo that seemed to pierce through the room, leaving silence in its wake. The courtroom felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of judgment. Ava stood, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been waiting for this moment her whole life, and yet, now that it had arrived, it felt hollow. The prosecutor's words still echoed in her ears, guilty of all charges. Her mind raced as she looked at her family, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. Her father, once the pillar of strength, had aged a decade in a matter of weeks, his face pale as he whispered, "It's not over yet." But Ava wasn't sure she believed that anymore. This verdict would change everything. The defense had failed her. Her hands trembled as she held the crumpled paper with the names of the witnesses who were supposed to prove her innocence. The truth had been buried beneath layers of lies, and as she stood there she realized how little she understood about the justice system. It wasn't about truth. It was about survival. Ava sat in her car, the engine idling, but her mind was far from still. The events of the past few hours were a blur, but one thing was crystal clear. The world was closing in on her. She glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But there was only the darkness of the empty street, stretching out before her like a vast, silent void. The pressure in her chest grew heavier, and she took a shaky breath. She wasn't alone though, she had her family. They were her lifeline. Still, the haunting words from the courtroom echoed in her mind. Guilty. She clenched the steering wheel, her knuckles white with strain. There had to be a way out of this. But even as she thought it, a sense of dread gnawed at her. The system had failed her once, and now it seemed to be closing in for the final blow. Her mind flashed to the faces of the witnesses who hadn't shown up, the damning evidence that had never come to light. There was more to the story. She was sure of it. But how much more could she take? The night seemed to stretch on forever, as Ava walked through the dimly lit alley behind her apartment. Her footsteps echoed off the walls, matching the rhythm of her racing heart. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let the system defeat her, but with each passing moment, the weight of the court's decision pressed harder. Her family had tried to comfort her, but Ava couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. She'd been given a chance to speak her truth in the courtroom, but the lies stacked against her had been too powerful. The prosecutor had been relentless, twisting her words, turning the smallest details into damning evidence. She had tried to stay calm, tried to hold on to the belief that the truth would set her free, but now she was uncertain. Was the truth really enough? Or was the system simply a machine that ground people like her into dust? She turned the corner sharply, her mind spinning. Ahead of her she could see the faint glow of a street lamp, but it wasn't enough to chase away the darkness that was creeping into her thoughts. She had one last chance to make it right, and she knew it was going to require more than just faith in the system. It was going to take everything she had left. The sharp rap on her door startled Ava. She had just sat down with a cup of tea, trying to quiet the noise in her head, when the knock came again, more insistent this time. She wasn't expecting anyone. She wasn't ready for any more surprises. Hesitant, she stood up and walked toward the door, her hand resting on the knob, fingers trembling. She didn't know if she was ready to face anyone else after the courtroom's rejection. But the knock came again, louder this time, with an urgency she couldn't ignore. Ava glanced through the peephole. For a moment, she didn't recognize the face standing on the other side. The man was tall, his features sharp, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Something about him seemed off, but then he spoke, his voice low and calm. "I know who did this to you." Ava's pulse quickened. She stepped back from the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Could she trust him? Was this a trap? The last thing she needed right now was another person trying to manipulate her. But something in his voice, something in the calmness he projected, made her hesitate. She wasn't sure why, but she knew she had to open the door. The door creaked open slowly, the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. Ava could feel the stranger's gaze even before he spoke again. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "But I can help you. You're not crazy. They've been setting you up all along. Ava stared at him, her mind racing. This could be a trick. He could be one of the many people who had tried to manipulate her, trying to use her desperate need for answers. But his words struck a chord deep within her. She was tired of being ignored, tired of being dismissed as just another person who couldn't fight the system. But this man's voice, the certainty in his words, told her he knew something. And Ava needed to know what it was. She opened the door fully, stepping aside to let him in, but every part of her was on edge. She had no idea who he was, but she could feel something shifting, something bigger than her own personal fight for justice. She just wasn't sure if she could trust him yet. As he stepped over the threshold, he glanced around her modest apartment, scanning the space with an unsettling focus. "They've been watching you," he added, his voice barely above a whisper. "And they're not done yet." Ava swallowed hard. If he was telling the truth, she was in even deeper trouble than she had imagined. Ava sat with Mark in a small, dimly lit apartment, still reeling from the courtroom verdict. Mark's voice broke through her thoughts. "You were framed," he said. "The prosecutor's not the end of this. It's bigger. And someone's behind it all." Eva's mind raced. She'd been given names, but they led to dead ends, and every lead seemed to vanish. "Who's doing this to me?" she asked. Mark hesitated. "I don't know, but we'll find out." Days passed, and Ava dug deeper, following the names Mark had given her. But each lead ended in fear or silence. A former investigator once involved in her case seemed terrified to talk. Ava's frustration grew, and just as she sat, defeated, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was late. Who could it be? She opened it cautiously, finding a man she hadn't seen before. "I know who did this to you," he said, his voice urgent. He stepped inside quickly. "They're watching you." The man, who introduced himself as an insider, warned Ava that she was in danger. "They've been watching you," he said. "You've been digging too deep." He hesitated, glancing nervously around. "The prosecutor, the witnesses, they're all tied into a larger network. But you're not alone. I can help you find the answers, but you need to trust me." Ava's breath caught. Could she trust him? But she had no choice. "What do you want from me?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes full of urgency. "Your father's more involved than you think. You need to confront him." Alva's mind raced after the meeting. Mark was right. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. But she had to confront the truth. The man's warning about her father lingered in her mind. Could her father be part of this? The next morning, she found a disturbing clue, her father's name, linked to several powerful figures, in a financial report. The evidence was beginning to point back to him. She needed to know more. The risk was growing, but Ava knew she had to keep going. She couldn't stop now. Determined, Ava set out to meet someone who could help, Bennett, a private investigator. Mark had warned her Bennett was dangerous, but she had no other choice. They met at a coffee shop, where Mark's warning about Bennett being part of the conspiracy seemed more real than ever. "Your father's connected to powerful people," Bennett said, his voice calm. "You're digging in the wrong place. I can help, but only if you listen to me." Alva's pulse raced as the two figures drew closer. Their faces were still hidden, but their presence felt like an inescapable force. She could feel the cold air biting at her skin, the streetlight above casting an ominous glow on the pavement. Her breath quickened, and for a brief moment she thought of running. But she didn't. She couldn't. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to let these men intimidate her. "What do you want?" Ava's voice was shakier than she intended. The first figure, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward, his voice low and calculating. "We want the same thing you do, to stop you from digging into things that don't concern you. You've been poking around where you shouldn't, Ava." Ava's mind raced. This wasn't just some random encounter. These men were part of something bigger, something she was just beginning to understand. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You should be," the second figure replied, his tone almost mocking. "You're already too deep." Alva's grip on the sharp object in her bag tightened. This was her moment. She had to act before they could make the first move. Ava's hand instinctively gripped the sharp object in her bag as the two figures closed the distance between them. She knew it was a risky move, but she couldn't let them get any closer. Without warning, she lunged forward, aiming for the first figure's chest. But before she could strike, a strong hand gripped her wrist, stopping her in mid-motion. The second figure, who had been silent until now, spoke again. "We're not here to hurt you, Ava. Not yet, anyway." Ava froze, heart pounding. The grip on her wrist tightened, and she realized she was caught. "What do you mean, not yet?" she demanded. The first figure's voice was cold and emotionless. "You've been making waves. People don't like that. We're here to give you a warning." Ava fought to free her wrist, but the man's grip was like iron. "I don't take threats well," she spat. "Maybe you should reconsider your position." But the second figure's laugh was chilling. "Oh, we know, you're a fighter. But you're running out of time. Soon the people you trust will start turning on you. And when they do, you'll have nowhere to run." Ava's stomach churned. She had to get away. She had to act fast. Ava struggled against the man's grip, but it was no use. She was trapped, and her mind raced for a way out. The second figure stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "You should have stayed out of this, Ava," he said in a tone that made her skin crawl. "There's a lot more at stake than you realize." Ava's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of the cryptic message. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to gain some leverage. "Does it really matter?" the first figure said, his voice gruff. "We work for people who don't like to be seen, and right now you're making us a target." Ava's thoughts raced. This wasn't just about her case anymore. It was bigger than that. The people behind this weren't just criminals. They were powerful, and they were watching her every move. Ava's grip on the sharp object in her bag tightened again. She wasn't going down without a fight. The man holding her wrist seemed to sense her resolve. "You won't get far, Ava, not without us." He released her wrist, but Ava didn't move. She was still calculating, still trying to figure out her next step. But the words of the second figure echoed in her mind. "Soon, the people you trust will start turning on you." After what felt like an eternity, Ava finally took a step back, her hand still gripping the sharp object inside her bag. The two men didn't move, but they didn't need to. Ava's mind was spinning with the possibilities. She could run. She could fight. But she needed answers, and the more she pushed, the more dangerous this situation would become. "Tell me who you work for," Ava demanded, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. The first figure stepped back slightly, as though considering her words. "You don't want to know," he replied, his voice low. "It's better if you stay out of this. Go home, Ava. Leave all this behind before it's too late." Ava's gaze never wavered. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice cold with determination. The second figure glanced at the first before speaking again. "Your family, your friends, they'll all become targets if you keep pushing. You're already on their radar. The only thing you have left is time." Ava's stomach twisted. "How much time?" she asked, knowing she wouldn't like the answer. The second figure smiled darkly. "Not much." The figures didn't move. Ava's heart was still racing, and the weight of their words lingered in her mind. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing was clear. She couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed help. And not just any help. She needed to find Mark. The second figure stepped back, raising his hand slightly. "You've been warned, Ava. Consider this your last chance to walk away." Ava swallowed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The figures turned, disappearing into the darkness from where they came, leaving Ava standing in the street alone. She took a deep breath, her pulse slowing as the immediate danger passed. But she knew this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The game had changed. And now, it was all about survival. The days after the encounter with the two figures were filled with unease. Ava had gone into hiding, keeping her movements to a minimum. Her apartment felt like a cage, and every creak of the floorboards, every knock on the door, made her jump. Mark still hadn't contacted her, and she had no idea where to turn next. The chilling words of the men replayed in her mind. Your family, your friends, they'll all become targets. Every time she thought about her father, her mind spiraled into panic. She couldn't risk them getting involved. But at the same time, she needed help. She couldn't do this alone. The truth was buried somewhere, and she was running out of time to uncover it. Ava sat in the dark corner of her living room, her laptop open in front of her. She was scanning through pages of documents, but they all seemed to lead to dead ends. Her eyes were tired, her body slumped from hours of fruitless searching. But then, something caught her eye. A name. Aang? It was buried deep in a government report about a financial scandal that had long been overlooked. The name was linked to the prosecutor, the one who had brought her case to trial. Ava leaned forward, her heart racing. The pieces were starting to fit together. But who would believe her if she exposed it? The name on the report was connected to something far bigger than Ava had anticipated. It wasn't just the prosecutor. This led back to people in high places. People who controlled much of the city's legal and financial systems. The connections were deep and tangled, like a web she could barely begin to untangle. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. That night, Ava made a decision. She couldn't wait for Mark any longer. She had to confront the truth head-on. She needed to meet someone who could help her piece it all together, someone who might have more information. There was a private investigator in town, one that Mark had briefly mentioned before disappearing. His name was Bennett, and he had a reputation for getting results when everyone else gave up. The problem was, Bennett worked with the people Ava was trying to expose. He was compromised, a man who could either help her or turn on her. But she had no other options. As she gathered her things, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. I'll meet you tomorrow. Trust no one else. Ava felt a mix of relief and dread. She was getting closer, but she was also stepping into deeper, more dangerous territory. The meeting was set for the next morning at a coffee shop on the edge of town. Ava arrived early, her nerves fraying with every passing minute. She had no idea what to expect. Mark's message had given her hope, but she still didn't trust him completely. And Bennett, she wasn't sure where his loyalties truly lay. As she walked into the coffee shop, she spotted Mark immediately, sitting at a corner booth with his head down, almost as if he was trying to stay unnoticed. Ava hesitated for a moment before walking over. Mark looked up as she approached, and his face softened, though the tension in his eyes never left. You came, he said quietly. I wasn't sure you would. Ava took a seat across from him, her gaze flicking nervously to the door. What's going on, Mark? Why haven't you been in touch? Mark sighed, looking around the room before leaning in closer. It's worse than I thought, Ava. The people behind this. They'll do anything to keep you quiet. And Bennett, he's not on our side. He's working for them. Ava's breath caught in her throat. You knew? She asked, a mix of betrayal and anger flooding her chest. Mark nodded. I didn't have a choice. I was too deep. But now, I can help you. We just have to be careful. Ava's eyes narrowed. How careful? Mark hesitated before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. You're running out of time. You're in over your head, but I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Ava couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was hiding something. The way he hesitated when she asked about Bennett, the way he seemed so eager to help but equally afraid. It didn't add up. She watched him closely, her suspicion growing with every word. If Bennett is working for the people who are trying to destroy me, why should I trust him? She asked, leaning in, her voice low. Mark's expression darkened. Because he's the key to everything, Ava. If we're going to bring them down, we need him on our side. But you have to be careful with him. He's unpredictable. And if he thinks you're a threat, he won't hesitate to cut you loose. Ava took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face Bennett, but she knew that this was her only chance. As the conversation continued, Ava felt a growing sense of dread. The pieces were coming together, but every step forward seemed to lead her deeper into danger. And the closer she got to the truth, the more she felt the eyes of her enemies on her. She had to keep moving. She had no choice now. "I'll meet with him," Ava said finally, her voice steady. "But I'm doing this on my terms." Mark didn't argue. He knew there was no stopping her now. The meeting with Bennett was set for the following evening. Ava arrived at a rundown building on the outskirts of town, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment she had been dreading, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to find out what Bennett knew, and how much of a threat he truly was. She walked up the narrow staircase to the third floor, her footsteps echoing in the silent building. As she reached the door to Bennett's office, she hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door creaked open, and Bennett stood in the doorway. His face was unreadable, but there was a glint in his eyes that made Ava uneasy. "You came," he said simply, stepping aside to let her in. Ava stepped into the dimly lit office, her eyes scanning the room. It was sparse, just a desk and a couple of chairs. The only sound was the soft hum of a flickering light bulb overhead. "What do you know about the people behind my case?" Ava asked, her voice steady but her heart racing. Bennett didn't answer immediately. He closed the door behind her and locked it. "Let's talk," he said, his tone cold and calculating. Ava sat across from Bennett in his dimly lit office, the tension between them palpable. Her mind raced as she waited for him to speak, her fingers nervously tapping against the edge of the chair. Bennett had closed the door behind her, locking it with a resounding click that seemed to echo through the room. His eyes were calculating, and his lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't a reassuring one. "You're a brave woman, Ava," he said, his voice low. "But you're in over your head." Ava clenched her jaw, refusing to let him see her unease. I'm not afraid of you," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. Bennett leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You should be. The people behind all of this, they've been planning for a long time. You're just a pawn in a much bigger game." Ava's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment. The moment when everything could either fall apart or come together. She had to push him, to make him say what she needed to hear. "What do you know about the prosecutor?" she asked, her voice tight with urgency. Bennett paused, his eyes flicking to the door before returning to hers. "You're asking the right questions, but you're also treading dangerously close to answers that could get you killed." Ava's resolve hardened. "I'm not backing down. You want to help me? Then tell me what you know." Bennett's lips parted, but he didn't speak right away. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, the weight of the silence suffocating. Finally, he sighed, his gaze shifting briefly to the window before returning to Ava. "The prosecutor is just a puppet," he said, his voice cold. "A cog in a much larger machine. He's working for someone with much more power than he is willing to admit." Ava's heart raced. This was the breakthrough she'd been waiting for, but it came with a terrifying realization. "Who is it?" she demanded. Bennett's gaze never wavered, but his expression became more guarded. "I can't tell you everything," he replied, his voice clipped. "Not yet, but I can point you in the right direction." He stood abruptly, walking over to a filing cabinet. Ava's pulse quickened as he pulled out a thick folder, flipping it open to reveal a set of names and photographs. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents. "These people," Bennett said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "they're the ones behind the curtain. They've been controlling everything, pulling strings in the shadows, and they've been watching you." Ava's fingers trembled as she traced the names with her eyes. These were the people who had ruined her life. And now, she had the proof. Ava's hands shook as she flipped through the pages in the folder. The names and photographs were connected to some of the most powerful figures in the city, politicians, business tycoons, and law enforcement officials. It was a network, a web of influence and corruption that reached farther than she had ever imagined. The pieces were starting to come together, but with each new revelation, the danger grew exponentially. "This is it," Ava whispered, her voice barely audible. This is the evidence I need. Bennett's gaze was sharp, studying her. It's a start, he said, his voice grave. But it's not enough. You're still missing a key piece. A witness who can back up your claims. Without that, you'll just be a target. Nothing more. Ava slammed the folder shut, frustration bubbling up inside her. I don't have time for more games, Bennett. I need that witness. Where do I find them? Bennett's eyes flickered with something Ava couldn't quite place. You're not going to like this, he said slowly. The witness is someone you've already met. Someone close to you. Ava's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice rising with panic. Bennett's response was quiet, but it hit Ava like a punch to the gut. Your father. Ava stood frozen for a moment, the weight of Bennett's words sinking in. Her father? He couldn't be involved. He was always the one who protected her, who kept her safe. But the look in Bennett's eyes told her that the truth was far worse than she could have imagined. No, she whispered, her voice shaky. You were lying. My father would never. Bennett's expression softened, but only slightly. I'm not lying, Ava. Your father is in deeper than you realize. He's been playing both sides, keeping himself clean while making sure the wheels of this machine keep turning. Ava shook her head, trying to block out the growing panic in her chest. No. This can't be true. He's the one who's been helping me. He's the one who's been hiding the truth from you. Bennett interrupted, his voice firm. You've been manipulated, Ava. You've been living a lie. Ava felt the room close in around her. Her father, the man she had trusted her whole life, was part of the conspiracy. She could feel the world slipping away from her. Everything she had fought for, the truth, the justice, had been a lie. Ava stumbled back, her head spinning. Her father, the one person who had always been there for her, the one person she had believed in completely, he was involved in this web of lies and corruption. It was too much to process, too much to bear. You're wrong, she said, her voice cracking. I don't believe you. Bennett didn't flinch. I wish I were wrong, Ava, but this is the reality you're facing. You can't run from it. Ava's chest tightened as tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was done being manipulated. She had to take control of her own life, even if it meant confronting the people she loved. I'll find the truth, she whispered fiercely. I don't care what it costs. Bennett's eyes softened just slightly, but his voice remained firm. I'll help you. But you need to understand your father won't go down without a fight, and neither will the people behind him. Ava stood straighter, wiping away the tear that had escaped. She was done running. It was time to face the real enemy, and she wasn't backing down. Ava and Mark rushed through the streets toward the safe house, feeling the pursuit closing in. Mark quickly checked his phone. We have minutes before they catch up, he said. Inside the safe house, Mark spread out documents. Your father's the mastermind behind this, he revealed. Ava's heart sank. Where do we find the witness, she asked. Mark hesitated. We don't, but I know someone who can help. Inside, Ava scanned the documents, confirming her father's involvement. This can't be happening, she whispered. Mark's voice was grim. We need the witness, but without them we're stuck. Ava's frustration mounted. Where do we find them? Mark replied. We can't, but I know who can help. His eyes grew dark. Your father. Ava's phone buzzed. Her father was calling. She hesitated before answering. You're making a mistake, he said coldly. I know the truth, Dad, she replied, her voice steady. His silence was followed by, You don't know anything. Stay away, or you'll regret it. Ava hung up, her resolve hardening. Mark said, He's not going to help you. Ava looked at Mark, her voice steady. Now we go after him. Mark nodded, knowing they couldn't delay any longer. Let's expose the truth. They left the safe house, ready to face whatever came next. The footsteps behind them grew louder, echoing through the narrow alley. Ava's instincts kicked in, and she grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward a nearby doorway. They ducked inside, their breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Ava pressed her back against the cold brick wall, her eyes scanning the street through a crack in the door. The shadows were moving closer, and she could just make out two figures, their faces hidden in the darkness. Mark pulled his phone from his pocket, typing quickly. "We've got to move now," he whispered urgently. "They know we're onto them. This is our only chance." Ava's pulse raced as she nodded, her grip tightening on the documents. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mark glanced over at her, his eyes steely with determination. "We have one place left to turn, but it's a risk. I can't promise it'll be safe." Ava took a deep breath, her mind racing with the possibilities. She didn't have a choice. She had to keep moving forward. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady. "We're not backing down." Ava and Mark ran through the alley, desperate to escape the men pursuing them. Mark checked his phone. "We have one shot. There's a safe house at the edge of town. We need to lay low and plan our next move." They reached the safe house, a run-down building. Inside, Mark laid out the documents. "These prove your father's the mastermind behind this. It's worse than we thought," he said. Ava's breath caught. "How do we find the witness?" she asked. Mark looked grim. "We don't. But I know someone who can help." Inside the safe house, Ava scanned the documents, finding proof of her father's involvement. "This can't be true," she whispered. Mark's expression hardened. "It's true, and we need to act fast, but we need the key witness to confirm it." Ava, frustrated, clenched her fists. "Where do we find them?" Mark replied. "We can't, but there's someone who can help, someone close to you." Ava's stomach twisted. "Who?" Mark's gaze turned dark. "Your father." Ava's phone buzzed. It was her father. She hesitated, then answered. "Ava," his voice was cold. "You're making a mistake." "I know the truth, Dad," she replied, her voice steady. There was silence, then, "You don't know anything. Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." Ava's heart pounded. Mark said softly, "He's not going to help you." She nodded. "I know." Ava hung up the phone, her hands trembling. "Now we take the fight to him," she said, her voice steady with determination. "I'm done hiding. Let's expose him." Mark nodded, and they left the safe house. Ava was ready, no more running. She had the truth, and it was time to bring it to light. Ava hung up the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. Her father's words echoed in her mind, but they no longer held the power they once did. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. Mark watched her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and understanding. "What now?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Ava took a deep breath, her gaze hardening. "Now we take the fight to him," she said. "I'm done running. We're going to expose him once and for all." She turned toward the door, her hand gripping the handle with resolve. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady. Mark nodded, and together they left the safe house. The time for hiding was over. They had the evidence. They had the truth. Now all they needed was the courage to take it to the authorities and face the consequences that would follow.